All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this wonderful and very important topic of conversation, women in investing. Today, we're excited to host our second Vital Voices Northwest speaker event featuring inspiring women leaders in the Northwest region. Thank you to all of our Northwest Council members for your support, and especially Rasha, Camilla, and Event Horizon for co-hosting this wonderful event. For those of you that are not familiar with us, Vital Voices is an international nonprofit dedicated to investing in women leaders that are addressing the world's biggest problems. So as you can imagine, we're extremely excited to be here today. A little bit more about our work. We work with women to further human rights, boost civic engagement, diversify political representation, shift culture, and foster economic opportunity. And through that work, we've seen some agents of change, women leaders use their power, be it their voice, their platforms, and their work to empower others. We take advantage of the wonderful platform that we have to then bring visibility to this transformational approach about empowering others through the power that we use through our own vehicles, our own realm of work, our own organizations, and the voices that we do have to advance change. So as you can imagine, once again, we're extremely thrilled to be joined today by three women leaders using their power in the venture capital space to change things in the Northwest region. Before we get started, a brief introduction about myself. My name is Eugenia Podessa. I'm Senior Director of Economic Empowerment and Entrepreneurship at Vital Voices. And in that role, I have the wonderful opportunity to oversee our VV Grow Fellowship. It's a one-year accelerator for women-owned SMEs that's global. And it's just such an important topic of conversation that we have today, as we know that access to capital is one of the biggest barriers that women entrepreneurs face. And even though there's so much changing in the space, there's still so much that needs to be done, so there's greater access to women. So today we are joined by a powerhouse group of women in investing, Heather Redmond, Hope Cochran, and Judy Sandler. I'll tell you a little bit about them briefly. So Heather Redmond has a multifaceted career in early stage and high growth companies and has served as Senior Vice President at Atom Shockwave Inc., Getty Images Inc., and Photodisc Inc., Vice President of Business Operations at Indix Corporation, and Senior Vice President at Summit Power Group. She's experienced in corporate development and finance, mergers and acquisitions, business development, and intellectual property strategy. Currently, she is co-founder and managing partner at Flying Fish Partners. Welcome, Heather. Hope Cochran is a managing director at Madrona Venture Group. In this role, she identifies and leads new investments, provides strategic and operations advice to Madrona portfolio companies, and fosters corporate and strategic business development relationships. Prior to joining Madrona, Hope was the CFO of King Digital, the creator of Candy Crush. I'm sure many of us know Candy Crush, and other successful mobile games. Prior to this, she was the CFO at Clearwire, a telecom company. Welcome, Hope. And we also have Julie Sandler here with us today. She's managing director at PSL, where she spends most of her time running their venture capital arm, PSL Ventures. Prior to PSL, Julie was a partner at Madrona Venture Group, where she led the firm's investments in Integris, Poppy, and Julep. She is an adjunct lecturer at the University of Washington Foster School of Business and teaches an MBA course on entrepreneurship, for which she's been named a UW Star Teacher several years running. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we start, I'd like to also thank everyone for tuning in for the first part of this session that we have here. I'll be moderating a conversation, and then we'll turn to Q&A and questions. So please feel free at any point in time to drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them throughout the session. So before we dive into venture capital and more of the specific nuts and bolts of the issue that we're grappling with here, I'm really curious, and I'm sure that the group here tuning in is also wondering how each of you got into this line of work. So if you could just briefly share just a little bit about your journey, and I'll start with Heather.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having us. This is I'm really honored to be on a panel with Hope and Julie. I don't think the three of us have ever been on a panel together, and we should be all the time, right? I mean, we should be the dream team for every venture panel, you know, in the region for sure. But it's really great to see them, and kudos to Vital Voices for managing to corral all three of us in one place at one time. That's shows the power of your organization, and also how persistent you guys are. You know, good grit there, good grit. So I really am in venture for two reasons. One was that I, you know, my own midlife crisis kind of took the form of what can I do that will be sort of my highest and best use, you know, sort of what's the thing that needs doing that I'm only one of the only people that could do it. And then also what's going to just scare the hell out of me and be super challenging. So that was sort of my personal motivation. And then the sort of the why, you know, is this my highest and best use point is that, you know, as we all know, women are really underrepresented in sort of the upper echelons of power in society. And I think that has a lot to do with money. And I think particularly money that is very sort of high velocity money, which is sort of the money that's made in technology today, that's an area where women are particularly underrepresented. So I was very passionate about being a person who showed that women could exist in that environment and could, you know, could lead a firm in that environment. And then the other thing, which I know Hope and Julie also share, is just the frustration at the capabilities of this region being undercapitalized. So that gap between what this region can do and has done and the amount of capital that it has available to it. So, you know, when I was thinking about my highest and best use, it was help the region and help women sort of climb that money ladder. And then the way that I got into it was founding my own firm, which is, you know, we had a question the other day on a panel that I was on about, well, why didn't you just join a firm? It's very hard to join a firm, particularly if you're senior. And so sometimes if you want something to exist and you want to have a role in it, you have to build it yourself.
I love it. And I think, you know, just capturing on that message of highest and best use is absolutely something that we hear time and time again with the women that we work with, right? It's that sense of purpose that really drives you to move forward, understanding the challenges and obstacles that you faced, trying to make it different and more accessible to others. But at the same time, understanding that you are also facing something new and it's challenging. And there are some difficulties with that, but still, you know, spearing forward. You know, I definitely applaud you and thank you so much for sharing your journey. Hope, please tell us, what was your journey like?
Thank you. It's great to be a part of this group today. And I love to hear Heather and Julie's stories. So it's always encouraging to me as well. You know, my journey actually has a lot of the same themes as Heather. I think we'll hear that over and over again today. But I really started out on my journey being a CFO, and similar to Heather, like, how do you get your first C title? You give it to yourself. I started my own company and deemed myself the CFO, and that started me on. So I was a CFO in little companies, and then in medium-sized companies, and then most recently, you know, public large companies. And then as I sold my last company, King Digital, and quite frankly, I view Candy Crush as a social impact business, but that's a whole different topic. But my last role as the CFO of Candy Crush sold that to Activision. And so that's always, you know, a moment where you have to reflect and say, what do I want to do next? And I had now done the CFO role 5 times. And I loved it when Heather said, you know, this new adventure scared her. That's actually how I've taken every single new role. If there's an element of it that makes me really nervous, that thinks I can't do it, I tend to run towards it and say I have to try. And so that's kind of how venture came to me. I started doing some public company board work, which is also part of my world. And then was able to overlay that with getting involved with startups in the Seattle region, helping them to think about how to raise money, build their companies. And that led me into being able to work with Madrona Venture. So I love having this combination of working with baby companies with Madrona and then working with big public companies with my board work. And I underestimated how much going to the venture side was going to be a new career for me, and how many new muscles I've had to learn. And so it's been like a new birth, and it's very exciting. And I just love working with the companies from the ground up.
It's so exciting. And I can't wait to hear more about what some of those learnings have been. Again, it's that running towards fear, right? And just knowing that you'll figure it out somehow, right? As you have. But I think another really interesting theme, and I like to pull the themes together because I think it's important. It's something that we all share and take away from these conversations, is the whole idea that sometimes it's not necessarily advocating inside an already existing institution, right, for more representation and for more opportunity. Sometimes it will take us stepping outside and creating our own, right? And that's a beautiful thing. And so I applaud both of you for doing that. And that is, it's the role of a role model as well. I mean, that's an opportunity that a lot of women who start their own businesses and venture out, they do that, right? It's really thinking about, okay, things are not working for me. Both socially, I want to solve this problem, but these existing infrastructures are not allowing me to also make that happen. So how do I create it on my own? So thank you so much. Julie, share with us, please.
Yeah, please. Thank you. And just, echo everything Heather and Hope said so beautifully. And also a huge thanks to Vital Voices, not only for convening us today, but also just the fantastic impact you have on both a local and global level. It's really exciting to get to connect with all of you and this community that you've put together. So originally I started out thinking that I was going to become a psychologist. Did my undergrad and master's in psychology, ended up just sort of falling into the tech sector through college and the local career services office, and being recruited by a firm that basically put me into product and marketing roles where I'd be leading small teams. And over the next 7 years or so, kind of came in and out of large companies like Microsoft and then Amazon, as well as small companies like one of Madrona's portfolio companies back in the early 2010s, Teach Street, leading sort of small product and marketing teams for those companies. And really through that last company I mentioned, got to know the Madrona team by virtue of being at one of their portfolio companies. And really that was my first brush with what this sort of vague notion of what a venture capitalist really is. And it became a position that I got a lot of respect for, because I saw just the great impact that, our board members had on the trajectory of that company. And through those relationships, ended up really getting recruited to a venture capital firm as, a younger person in my career, sort of coming in at the bottom of the ladder and, really kind of honing my chops in a totally different discipline that in a lot of interesting ways kind of merged the tech world and product and marketing and, business world with psychology. Go figure, because especially when you're an early stage investor, so much of that journey, the successes, the failures, really come down to organizational psychology, how teams work together, how teams grow, how they build. So it's been sort of neat to feel sort of I always say like the proverbial red sofa sort of in the room always when, either in a board role or just general advisor, investor role. Grew to a partner role at Madrona over several years. One of the former partners at Madrona said, hey, we've got this funky little startup studio over here in Seattle called Pioneer Square Labs. That Madrona actually was an investor in PSL, so there were a lot of close connections. And he had sort of said, look, we're doing something kind of different here, and down the road, might look to raise a fund. And if we did that, would you be interested in leading it for us? And that was just from personal perspective, a lot of change was happening in my life too. I just got married, was having a baby. And so it was just like, why not change everything up? And have been leading our venture firm, PSL Ventures, which Fund 1, $80 million fund. We'll have a Fund 2 that we're announcing shortly as well. And it's just been a wonderful adventure with a lot of great lessons learned side by side with these amazing women on this call.
How fascinating. You mentioned change, right? And that leads me to the next question, which is really looking at the backdrop of the last year, right? Both in terms of what we dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also with, you know, racial equality, a lot of the issues that we've been carrying as a nation and as a world for so long. And obviously, we see the changes all throughout our environment in so many different ways, right? The way that we live has changed, the way we do business has changed. And I'm wondering, from all of your perspectives, so how has that impacted the venture capital world? Like, what are the changes that you're seeing, and how do you see the future sort of unfolding with all of this backdrop that we're working with? And let me start with Hope.
You know, it has been such a year to reflect on. I've done a lot of that in the past, you know, December, January timeframe, and it's actually hard to even remember all the topics we've dealt with when you really go through it. And let's not forget the fires, and, you know, all, like, there's so many elements to the year that were just, you know, so unpredicted. I did a timeline of all things that you couldn't buy in different stages of the year, which was kind of humorous. Small desks, heaters, like, you know, but, you know, just indications of how our society had to change and adjust really, really quickly. And how did our business change and adjust really, really quickly as well? And what is brought more into focus, you know, I think there was this, we entered the year in January and February actually thinking it was going to be a really robust year. You know, the economic cycle was strong, everything was happy. And in one respect, we at Madrona were worried that our valuations were a little bit too high, like, because everything was so frothy. And then in March, everything shut down and we, you know, huddled. You know, you just become very inward at first and you say, are my companies healthy? Can they get through a period of turmoil? Do they have enough cash on their balance sheet? So it becomes very inwardly looking before you can, you know, deal with the crisis. And then I feel like in the summer months, there was this awareness that, okay, we can muster through this. Zoom is working. People are still selling stuff, you know, in certain industries, in the tech field specifically. And how can we have a broader perspective and a greater impact? And that's when, you know, we started to broaden out our perspective. And as you indicated, the racial inequality things really came to the forefront. So, you know, it's been interesting. I have, you know, I don't know that our investment philosophy has changed tremendously. We have our certain theses. Those theses have remained amazingly consistent in areas that we think we as a firm do well in and invest in. But I think as I reflect on it, I mean, diversity in my portfolio companies has always been a strong focus for me. But now it's a really easy topic to just say, we're going to do this. Because, you know, it's right at the forefront. I just finished recording a podcast with one of my CEOs. He's a white Caucasian male, but he is so intentional in this area. And right now, 66% of his company is gender diverse, so female or identifies as gender diverse. And his methodology in doing that is so intentional. And he would tell you that he views that it's the only way to grow a healthy, profitable company is to build this foundation. So there's been a lot of those topics. And to Heather's point about if we can have diversity at the top levels, we can influence that, then we can influence it all the way through. And so that has become a much greater focus this year. I've always felt like I've focused on it, but this year it's been, you know, top of mind and at every conversation. Intention,
right?
Yes.
And I think that is a key word. You know, we can't expect things to change unless we're doing it intentionally. And that means at every step of the process. So Heather, how have things changed for you? Has your thesis changed, or what are you seeing as other opportunities?
Yeah, I loved what Hope just said about some of the sort of the metrics that she applied to the year of, actually trying to mark it, as to what was happening when, because I think it is hard to grasp the enormity of it. I heard some quote that in the future, historians will specialize in specific quarters of 2020. So it'll be like, oh yeah, I'm an expert on Q2 2020, and I've dedicated my entire career to exploring Q2 of 2020. Hope is already doing that. This is a great time to be an early stage investor, which all of us are. We thrive on change, and we've had a lot of change that has been driven by COVID. Obviously, huge changes in human behavior around COVID, also huge changes in medicine around COVID, not only in the delivery of medicine, but the very science of vaccines. And we now know that what triggers the need for vaccine, viruses, are also associated with many other disease states like cancer that we really haven't factored in the past. So we've had some major breakthroughs from a medical standpoint, as well as from a human behavior and technology standpoint. But the COVID crisis also drove a reshaping of the economy. So we have a recession on top of a boom. Those two things are existing simultaneously. We've heard about the K-shaped recovery, but it truly is two economies running in parallel with very different outputs. Obviously, the awakening that we've had around racial injustice and injustice based on immutable traits generally has been hugely significant. And then we were already in a climate change environment that that has been there for a while, but has now become sort of self-evident to everyone. And then I think that the thing that a lot of people haven't factored in enough is that every time you change administrations, from Republican to Democrat or vice versa, that is a huge cataclysmic change and affects all sorts of different pieces of the economy and all sorts of different pieces of the social fabric. It also is particularly acute when the change is so drastic. I mean, the Trump administration was not like any administration we'd ever had before. And so the reaction of the Biden administration, I think, will also be unlike any administration we've ever had before. So that's a big shift. And then you couple that with the fact that we've got these historically low interest rates and have had them for a long time, along with this K-shaped recovery on top of a very, very long, 10-year long business cycle. The amount of capital that is chasing yield and returns out there is just staggering. So for a venture capitalist, you take a bunch of capital that has been just growing and growing and growing and is chasing yield and disruption on top of disruption on top of disruption, and I probably didn't even name them all, but those are just the ones that are top of mind. That is just a recipe for innovation and disrupted industries and opportunities that will emerge sort of overnight for great investments. So it's, and this is, of course, my soapbox that I want women to participate in that and not be on the sidelines. But the opportunity that we all have and that we can help others join in on right now is just completely unprecedented.
So fascinating. And I want to expand on this after we give Julie the opportunity to answer this question as well, just to start thinking about, so what does that look like? What does it look like to get more women involved, both in the role of venture capitalists, but also on the receiving end, right? And what does an ideal investment even look like? And how do we tell the women that we support and those that are tuning in how to best prepare for them for the opportunity? And what does that look like again? Because I think there is a lot of confusion around what is investment worthy and do I cut it, right? And we do see imposter syndrome all over the place. And we see it a lot within this access to capital, and actually getting to the point where you're going to venture out to look at, is that opportunity there for you? So I just want both you and Hope to start thinking about that as I turn to Julie to tell us about how all these changes have also impacted her.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll sort of connect some of those threads together too. I mean, you know, Heather, you described that, I think it was the cataclysmic shift that we've had. And I mean, that's such a great description. I mean, it's been sociocultural, socioeconomic, psychographic in terms of the population and how we're dealing with our circumstances. And if you do look at the numbers, women have been so much more adversely impacted as a population than men have. Just looking only at gender, putting everything else aside. And that impacts certainly our workforce. It impacts the makeup of our organizations. It impacts, you know, how families operate and how children, you know, see role modeling at the parental level, and it impacts who's actually receiving financing. You know, from, you know, a high level perspective right now in our portfolio, I think it's 1 out of every 3 of our companies is female founded, in most cases, female CEO. And what's been interesting to see evolve this year is the role of the CEO, because never before has a leader of an organization had to contend so much with the blending of personal and professional, of home and work, of family and, you know, collective within the context of an organization. And, you know, for a lot of the CEOs that, you know, all 3 of us are working with, many of which are first-time CEOs, by the way, in the very early stages of you know, their company stories, it's been a lot to contend with, not only for themselves individually, you know, trying to put a brave, confident face forward in the face of uncertainty, but also helping, you know, their employees, helping their teams manage through across all these intersecting dimensions of their lives right now. And that at just about every board meeting, even like a year into this, that's been a big change. Like, you do not have an executive session at a board meeting right now where you are not talking about how's the team doing, even though in many ways, you know, especially in the tech sector, a lot of groups have been able to adjust to a virtual environment. It's still such a top consideration, and so many groups and so many companies are struggling with it. For us, as you know, to your original question, you know, as an organization, certain things have shifted. The kinds of things we're invested in are one of them. Heather alluded to this. You know, this year we invested in a company focused on teen mental health, and staffing for senior care facilities and skilled nursing facilities. These areas that a year and a half ago, like, yeah, they were big markets, but the actual urgency of the demand was just not as obvious. And more and more, I think this year has proven these themes that they're going to keep emerging, become more and more interesting as we as a population adjust to that shift that Heather described.
It's fascinating. So what are some opportunities, and what are your thoughts? And Heather, let me start with you. Let's tackle first getting more women to access investment, right? What does that look like? How do we change? And I hate saying narrative because it's not narrative, it's reality. Like, how do we change the reality that women aren't getting as much as men, right? And they're not receiving it. They're not growing their businesses at their same rate. Where do we start?
Yeah, you know, this may be a little bit of a dodge, although I have some ideas on your specific question, but I think sometimes women want to start in a place, you know, they want to just kind of brute force it, and they want to say, okay, I want to start a company. Women have been underrepresented. I deserve to be funded. So I'm going to go forth and get this done. And I would suggest, and if you look at the careers that the 3 of us have had, that there's a lot of stuff you can do by way of building your resume and your career before you head off. And you know, one of the reasons that I think venture is tricky right now for women who want to enter it is that I think we peak later. You know, partly it's because a lot of us have kids, and so we take a period of time where we're probably not able to work quite as crazily as we normally do. And I would say we outwork most men when, you know, during every other period of our lives, certainly. But, you know, you might be a little bit, you may not be 22 when you start your first company. You may, you know, if you're highly technical and you've got your CS degree from Stanford, maybe you are. But if you aren't, you know, you may want to go be CFO of a substantial company, or go run biz dev or run product like Julie did before you start your company. And then the other thing that, you know, has been sort of a pet peeve of mine is that women worry a lot about being the recipient of dollars, but they don't think enough about how to deploy their dollars. And so women, you know, aren't building it. It's not about I'm a CEO or I'm a founder of a company. At the end of the day, the way women are going to get power and transmit that power to women in the developing world is by having a bunch of money and being the active driver of that money. And so, you know, you can get money by being a founder, but you can also get money by investing. And you may already have money, but you don't take credit for that money because you think of that money as your husband's money or money that you just got accidentally. And so now you're just going to give it away, but you're not going to invest it actively. So to me, I want to see women take every economic lever they can and be the agents of that economic lever and not be passive about it. And so, you know, to me, it's wherever you are in the ecosystem, whether you're an employee at a company or whether you're somebody who's investing your family's money or you have family money that is being invested, you know, you should be the one investing it. But wherever you are, you should take a more active role and you shouldn't try to skip any steps, you know, just stick with the program and get it done. Now, that said, we need women to just be full on respected. And so standing up for yourself and banding together with other women and male allies to stand up for yourself and to stand up for other women is absolutely critical. And I think we are all focused on and hold our respective firms accountable for taking women seriously, not having bias in our investment decisions. None of us have a set aside of like, oh, we're going to invest in 50% women. We all invest in the very best founders. So, you know, when we invest in a woman, she gets full faith and credit that her deal is the best deal on the table at the time. So it's definitely not a charity in any sense of the word. It is smart investing, but it also requires us to show up and beat our heads against the wall every day to make sure we're taken seriously and that we are bringing women into our funds at every level and in every part of the ecosystem. And part of that is having women just have a more aggressive and assertive and agent-oriented attitude about capital, period.
I love everything you said. You know, I think there's so much to look further into as we talk about equality and equity. If we don't tackle the economic inequality, so much of this is not going to change, right? And that's the bottom line. And we have sectors of populations that have not had access, been active, and it is about taking control, accessing the information, the guidance, understanding what really needs to get done to get to that next level, whatever that looks like, depending on where you are, as you said, in that ecosystem or in your own personal journey. The economic independence and power is important for change, period. You know, so we'll see how we continue to crack this huge challenge that we face. Hope, what are some of your thoughts?
You know, it's an interesting one. We all run venture firms, right? The three of us. And so I raised a ton of money in my career, right? I was a CFO. That was my job, was to raise money. I always tried to put myself in the position of the person I was trying to raise money from. How are they measured? How is that VC firm measured? And then does my opportunity fit that? And this is like male or female. But it is interesting because I do see more females kind of miss the mark than I see the guys miss the mark. And so what I mean by that, and I'll just speak for Madrona, it's probably similar for PSL and Heather, but in general, what we're looking for are businesses that have a big opportunity so they can build a big business. And I know that we all love to have social impact as part of it and diversity as part of it. So I love to hear that. But I first and foremost want to know that they're building a business that has an opportunity to make money. And sometimes that gets lost in the message. I love social enterprises, but ultimately that doesn't meet the criteria that I'm going to be measured on. I have to return, right? So I need to know that there is a great business and there's a big vision. I feel like a lot of women come in with a smaller vision that they can touch and feel like they can have impact, versus the guys will come in and be like, I can manage these huge things. So there's got to be some in between. But in general, as you try to raise money, you need to be aware of who's on the other side of the table and that particular firm's objective, and make sure you're hitting the mark. I always remind people, and this is one of the things when I say I'm learning a new job, I'm learning a new career, I don't like this part of my job. I probably personally invest in 2 or 3 deals a year. I see 4 or 5 a week. So, it is more likely that I'm going to say no than I'm going to say yes. And I hate that part of my job. I feel like I'm rejecting people's babies. But part of the way to get the yes is to really understand, are you a fit for this firm? Because I would say 50% of my no's are just it's just not what we do. So there's just that element of getting a little bit educated on who you're talking to and what they're looking for.
Very practical advice, right? And I think the example that you mentioned about not thinking bigger is something we hear all the time, and we see it and we experience it. There is, without getting into generalizations based on gender, we do see there is a pattern in the women that we work with being more risk averse, right? And so that means being more cautious about what is certain and only positioning what they believe is certain and not necessarily possible.
Well, Julie, and I'm a real stickler for doing your research.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a job interview. You're not going to go to a job and not know what they're doing and not know what they're looking for.
I will tell you, each night, I call it my homework time, but every night I unfortunately work, whether that's good or bad. But most of that work is preparing for the next day. Who am I meeting with? What do I want out of those meetings? What do those people want out of those meetings? Am I spending my time appropriately? But coming into the pitch, knowing who's on the other side of the table goes a long way, and what they're looking for.
Love it. Great practical advice. Julie.
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree. I wish there was more disagreement on this panel, because I feel like we're all just yes, that's right. And, I'd say too, I mean, I agree with the notion that if you paint with broad strokes, yes, women founders need to show up with their research down pat. They need to talk big, but part of that is understanding how you talk about yourself. Literally, right before this this conversation, I took yet another meeting this week with a 29-year-old white male straight founder, talking about all these amazing things he's somehow accomplished, unlike every other 20-something, in his 20s. And it sounds amazing. And I'm it kind of even though you kind of have a radar that gets trained against this, it does sound kind of impressive, and it builds this sort of subliminal confidence. And what you need to remember is that, especially if you are a female entrepreneur coming in for a solo pitch or a combined pitch with your co-founder, is who I've been meeting with earlier in that day and how they've been talking about themselves and their accomplishments. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, if I always say this, if you are not walking into that investor meeting as a female entrepreneur, feeling like the most obnoxious, overconfident version of yourself in how you're talking about yourself, then you're doing something totally wrong. you have to feel them. And by the way, if you are going in feeling like you are the most obnoxious, overconfident version of yourself, odds are, compared to that founder that I just met with, you're only kind of getting into the same ballpark, right? And so as you talk about your accomplishments, I think so many of us are trained to, minimize things, to not sound like we're bragging or overly aggressive, in trumpeting our accomplishments, but you have to, because every investor knows that the deck is stacked against women founders. And so I need to know, when I write that check, that when you go to raise your, your Series A round from, a larger fund, from Madrona or larger, that, you're not going to go in saying like, oh yeah, I helped to do this, when really you freaking owned that product, you owned that business, and you were the one who drove those results. And so that kind of element woven into your narrative is so it's often not thought of enough by founders of any underrepresented background, but certainly and most consistently with women founders. And I'd encourage, anyone listening to think about, how do you talk about yourself in the context of these kind of conversations, pitch or not.
I love how you landed on that. And given your background too, and I'm just reading here one of the questions in the chat. So if we're seeing this as a problem, right? That they're not selling a big enough vision. They're not as confident when they're presenting. They're not really taking ownership for all of their successes. How can we change that? Like, what are some things that you might have seen, or ideas that you might have? And is that more coaching? I mean, what does that look like? And then awareness, like, how do we also promote awareness? Because I think a lot of times they don't even realize that they're doing that. Any suggestions or tips?
To Hope's point, it's prep, it's practice. Have the meeting before you have the meeting. Get used to hitting the points that are most compelling. You're going to meet with a bunch of folks that maybe, are like not your top choice investors first, and like get the feedback, hear the hard questions, and learn from, where things fall apart or where things don't feel as strong, and then iterate. But, you want to have, like, when you have that dream meeting with either the employee you want to hire, the customer you want to bring aboard, the investor you want to raise from, like, you want to have had several of those meetings before you have the real meeting, so that all of that just feels by rote by the time you're actually in the room that you're most excited about.
Yeah, one of my parts of my background is, at school, I majored in econ and music. And I always say that, econ at least got me my interviews, but I've used my music degree my whole career. Like, the thought of getting on stage without being perfectly practiced is frightening. I can't do it, right? Like, it's just ingrained in me, like, practice, 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 practice. Never be unprepared.
Yeah, well, I'm now like wishing I had some of Hope's DNA, because I am the ultimate fly by the seat of your pants and, make it up. Like, I didn't prepare for this at all. I'm confessing now. But I was going to say one little hack that I've seen work, and just worked well for an investment that we made with a solo founder, woman CEO founder, who's amazing. I can tell already she's going to be one of our superstar CEOs. She used social proof well. So she leveraged some men that she knew well and she had worked with, and who thought very highly of her and who are respected by the investor community, to do some of that work that Julie alluded to. So she had some social proof from, the advantaged, highly technical white male cis founder group that, that could lend that to her, and did so gladly and with a great deal of respect for her. So that, in addition to the stuff that Julie said, I think that can be very helpful. And that's one of the reasons that I think, having a successful career working with other people before you start your startup is often a good route for women, because you can build up that group of allies. And not to mention, you can have watched a lot of those obnoxious male storytellers, and so you can figure out how to mimic them. It's kind of hard to just start out and do that cold without knowing kind of what you're trying to mimic. So I think there are some creative hacks that you can use, in addition to the mantra that Julie and Hope have said of, like, prepare, get coached, just have an out of body experience. One of the things along the lines that Julie said that somebody told me, and I have passed it along, so I'll pass it along to this group too, is that one of the most disturbing but also potentially empowering thought experiments you can do as a woman is imagine back when you were, a baby, that you had a twin brother. And now imagine his life at every stage, and imagine what he would be doing today if he were basically like you, only a man. So I found that to be just horrifying when I thought about it, but it also, makes me feel sort of entitled to take his, position in society at this point in time because he's not here, right? So that's another good way to think about kind of where you are and kind of what you're entitled to and how to present yourself.
These are all such wonderful tips, just the preparation, the presentation, the putting, and I think it's a good point, Heather, too. I think we all have different ways in which we can succeed at the performance element, right? And I think practicing and figuring out what it is that you need to prepare is important. You have to put time into that. It's critical. I know we're getting close to the end of the hour, and it's been such a wonderful, I could go on and on. I have so many more questions I would love to ask, and maybe there'll be a part two. But I want to make sure to give the audience here an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. And in the meantime, just thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your insights and recommendations. And I think there's a huge opportunity, as we all discussed. We're entering a new time. We've learned a lot. We've gone through a lot in each quarter of 2020. And hopefully we can find some wonderful opportunities to make a difference and just create a different way and path forward. Looking here, I guess, just to wrap up, any last thoughts, where you see things going, what you would like to see for yourself and your companies? Any last thoughts? And we'll start with you, Julie.
Well, I was just thinking, I was imagining Heather's twin brother and thinking, boy, I actually would like to embody his twin sister a little more in my career. It's so awesome to, and actually everyone in this Zoom room. But yeah, I would just say, if you're on this call and you're in a position where, you're thinking about starting a company, you already have a company and you're looking to raise capital, just to always remember that there's a great community here in the Northwest of folks who have a keen willingness to support. One of the great differentiators of this region, I think, especially vis-a-vis the Bay Area, is there's a very strong rising tides lifts all boats mentality, certainly across the startup community, across the entrepreneurial community and the investor community. And as you go about building your business, harnessing the resources you need to bring that vision you have to life, to tap into this region. I mean, a lot of us are in this work because we love supporting entrepreneurs, local organizations, local companies, and a lot of us have, I think, a real hometown connection here too. So just tap into the team. You're never in it alone, and we're all really lucky to be a part of this great region that we're in.
It's so wonderful, and inspiring, because it can be lonely, right? So understanding that there is this wonderful community, it's such a privilege. Hope.
I just echo what Julie said. I mean, I don't know that I have anything all that new and enlightening to say. I was on a Zoom cocktail hour the other day. I feel like those were all the rage at first, and then they got a little tiresome, and now we're starting to re-engage again. But it was the women VCs in the Pacific Northwest, and I think there were 40 of us on the call, of which I was shocked by. But I do think we have a good representation in this area, and we all want this to succeed and do well. So tap in. People are willing to help. People are willing to help you be that practice. And also, we always try, I know all three of us do try and give very real feedback. So we can really try and help you construct that. So you can see where you're not hitting the mark, but it's a wonderful place to start a company. It's a wonderful community. And there's a lot of resources to tap into.
Strong ecosystem. That's so wonderful. Heather.
Yeah, I love everything that both Hope and Julie said, and I agree. There is no better time to be starting a company, or no better place to do it. So that's sort of the most important takeaway. The other thing I would say is, I know a lot of you are already hitting it out of the park, but if you haven't yet confronted that question of what is my highest and best use, do confront that question and figure that piece out, because two things. Number one, if you have kids, your kids need to see you figure that out and take action on it. That is the most important thing you can do for your kids, I think. And then the second piece is that the world needs every bit of well-educated brain power that we've got, and women sitting on the sideline and not putting their brains and their educations to work is just terrible for society, but also terrible for the women themselves. So I just encourage you, if you feel like maybe you're not doing that highest and best work, then go do it.
Speaking of kids, Heather, I'm in the Madrona offices today because we were a little concerned about my internet at home. But I brought all my children with me. So they're all in individual offices here at Madrona, doing their virtual schooling and enjoying the snacks.
That's perfect. See?
So everyone had to get dressed up and get out of their bedrooms.
They may never go back, Hope. They're going
to be good. No, we've actually been doing it once a week because everyone focuses more. You get out of bed, you're like, it's like, and then they get to eat the snacks.
Yeah, it's all about the snacks.
Snacks are very important. So that's a perfect way to end. Tap in, find your purpose. We want to thank Hope, Heather, and Julie for their time here, for sharing. I want to thank the Northwest Council as well for hosting this event. To Rasha, Camille as well, and Event Horizon for joining us as co-hosts as well. And absolutely get in touch. If you're not involved with the council, if you're not involved with Vital Voices, let us know. We're happy to share opportunities to do so. And we look forward to hopefully future conversations with the three of them. Best wishes and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Everyone.